We know that you are God of you're King of Kings, Lord of Lords. And we come before you, Lord, if you are a holy God. And God, we're just sinners saved by grace. We ask today, Lord, that you would remove just hard hearts from us today, Lord. You would give us ears to hear. God, that we would not quench your spirit through just, unrepentativeness or pride. But Lord, we would be willing for you to work in us today, Lord, that we would expect, God, today for you to speak to our hearts. God, that we would be looking for how you can teach us today, Lord, just through, whether it's through showing us more about how you love, whether it's through the Holy Spirit revealing to us how we may repent. Oh Lord, or if it's how through your word and how we may live to be more like Jesus, Lord, we just ask that today, Lord, that God, you would use this time for your glory, for your benefit, and Lord, for our edification and building up, so that we may in turn bring glory to you. God, you speak through me. Have me behind the cross and your scriptures, and God, that your Spirit will lead us today. And that's God's name, Jesus. Amen. Today we'll look at Mark chapter 1. Actually, I want to take a look at Mark chapter 1 the next few times whenever it's my turn to preach. Well, preach, I said, probably more like teaching. I've heard someone say before, preaching is yelling it and teaching is telling it. So I'll probably just tell it today and teach. Have you heard the familiar expression, lights, camera, action? We hear it oftentimes when someone, well, in movies and in TV programs, whenever they are starting to film. And a video producer once gave the reason behind this. He said that before even a frame can be shot, that there's several hours and lots of preparation that are required. And to make sure that the scene is perfectly set, two things must be, or it is crucial for filming. And that is the lights and the cameras. The lights are important, and because too much light is bad. It can hide key features of someone's face or something on the set, and too little light would have the kind of same effect. We can't see people's faces too well or something on the set. And also the cameras, he said, were important because they need to be in certain positions and to see certain angles and to catch all of the action. There's sometimes 6 or 7 cameras filming one scene. So the director, he sees this, he sees the lights, and he tells the camera operators what to do and when to do it. And then therefore, once all the preparations are made, he says, lights, camera, and action. Or in other words, he's saying, hey, get ready, this one's for real. And Mark, in his gospel, it's essentially what he is doing here in chapter 1. He's setting the stage. He is kind of positioning the lights by beginning with the Old Testament prophecies about Jesus, shouting about Jesus, and then he introduces John the Baptist, someone who came to proclaim Jesus when he would come, or who came before Jesus and would proclaim what Jesus would do in his message. So these lights are on Jesus, and in John, Jesus actually said, I am the light of the world. And saw that. But then the cameras, Mark is kind of setting up the cameras to see, filming through maybe the baptism of Jesus here in chapter 1. And then after that, he has the temptation where he goes into the desert and is tempted by Satan. And Jesus overcomes that. And so from every angle, we're seeing that Jesus is not just another person, or just another prophet, but he's the one who the scriptures talk about and who were baptized with the Spirit. And then the actions begin when Jesus starts his ministry. here in chapter 1. He starts his ministry in the service in the synagogues in Galilee, preaching the good news and performing several miracles that we'll look at today. He was casting out demons, and he healed Peter's mother-in-law, and he did a few more. So the stage has been set, the cameras are rolling, and kind of this drama, so to speak, has begun. So Mark paints Jesus in kind of 4 verbal pictures today that we're going to look at. But before that, just a bit of background and context, and some of the teaching aspect. But Mark, if you don't know, Mark was the first gospel to be written. It was the earliest gospel, written maybe around 60 or 70 AD, about 30 years after Jesus went back up into heaven. And although Mark himself was not a disciple, but he knew Peter. Actually, some people might have said that Peter might have led him to become a Christian, and he also spent time with Paul. In fact, we can see in the book of Acts how Paul had a little bit of a disagreement with Mark, and they separated, but then later on they came back and worked together. So Mark is linked to 2 of the most prominent apostles in the Bible. And Mark, he probably got these stories that he wrote down from Peter, and was spending time with Peter and listening to Peter tell the stories about Jesus and what Peter saw. And Mark penned it and put it on paper. And when he was writing this book, he was writing to kind of counteract some of the dangerous distortions that had risen up during Mark's day. Apparently, some Christians had focused so much on Jesus' deity and his resurrection that they ignored his humanity and his suffering. And as a result, they began to think that they expected to be spared of the suffering and to this life, and to quickly join Jesus in the glories of heaven. But Mark sets out to retell this story, and he's showing how the kingdom in its glory comes after suffering and after a path of service that Jesus had. The Gospel of Matthew, he really emphasizes how Jesus was a teacher. For example, on the Beatitudes and Sermon on the Mount. John, the Wednesday night Bible study should know this. So John was written for showing how Jesus was the Son of God, and how he wasn't human as some people, wasn't only human as some people thought, but he was also the Son of God. And Mark here writes his gospel to show how Jesus was a servant king, and how we should follow him in service. And therefore, if we are to enjoy the glories of the kingdom, we must also follow Jesus on the road of servanthood and of suffering. And before our main text today, the first 15 verses, we'll start at 16. First 15 verses, Mark wrote about John the Baptist and how he was getting ready for Jesus to come. He wrote how Jesus came and was baptized by John the Baptist in the river, and then how Jesus was confronted by Satan, his adversary, and defeated him in the desert after 40 days of fasting. So after this time of fasting, Jesus starts his ministry in verse 16. Just keep in mind that the entire book of Mark is trying to capture a servant heart of Jesus. It begins here in chapter 1. Starting in verse 16, Mark writes about how Jesus was, he came and he gathered his disciples, or started to gather his disciples. And the first word picture he gives us of what he was like as a king. And he says this in verse 16, you follow along. He's passing alongside the Sea of Galilee. He saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going a little farther, he saw James and the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, who were in their boat mending the nets. And immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and followed him. So the setting here is the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee, it was a beautiful freshwater lake. The Jordan River flows into it. It was maybe about 16 miles long and 4 miles wide. If you, I can't convert that to kilometers. It's about 16 miles, 4 miles wide. And it was the most of Jesus' teachings and miracles was performed around this area. And interestingly, Josephus, he was a famous history writer in Jesus' time. Well, he said at this time, there's probably, in that space, like over 300, he said 330 fishing boats that were in the space. And among those were Jesus' first disciples. It was Simon and his brother Andrew. And Jesus called to them and he said, "Follow me." And actually in the Greek words that Mark used here, we can't really comprehend all that the Greek words mean in one sentence. The translators put it in 2 words, "follow me." But actually the Greek has several ideas behind it. The words he uses first is to respond to a summon. Like if someone calls you, then you're supposed to respond. Next, it's an attachment to a person. So you respond to someone, you attach yourselves to them. And then also has the idea of accepting the authority. So after you attach yourselves to them, you accept them as the authority, and then you imitate them. So really, in English we say 2 words, "follow me." But this has, the idea is, it's a continual action of pursuing a goal. It's continually responding to the summon, attaching yourself to the person, in this case Jesus, accepting him as authority, and to imitate him as an example. So there's a lot going on there in those 2 words. And Andrew and Simon, they hear these words, and Jesus declares to them that, "Hey, follow me and I will make you fishers of men." Fishers of men in the Old Testament, that kind of has an idea of judgment. They used it a few times, how the prophet Jeremiah said that the men will go out and they would go fish for men to bring judgment upon them. And also in Amos, he said that the judgment would come upon people and they would have hooks in them, kind of like fish have hooks in them, and they'll be dragged away into judgment. But here, rather, the purpose was not to bring people to judgment, but Jesus was calling them to go and tell people how to escape judgment. The Mark pictures Jesus' callings as an example of what is required of others. Jesus was calling Simon and Andrew to an urgent task of rescuing people from judgment, from the impending judgment that would come through what is implied through Jesus' teachings. That if we do not accept him, then one day there will be judgment. And this urgency demanded a response, and the phrase "at once" indicates the urgency at which these 2 guys followed Jesus. They left their nets, showing their willingness to make a total commitment to be a disciple of Christ. Then just a few moments later, I imagine Jesus extended the same call to James and John. And the price of discipleship is even further illustrated in their actions. They not only left their livelihood, which is what the first 2 did, but they also broke family ties and even tradition by leaving their father. Now, if the actions of Simon and Andrew illustrate an urgent response, the actions of James and John illustrate a complete response. And following Jesus is sometimes costly, and sometimes even involving family ties. So Mark showed the way in which all should respond to Jesus' calling, promptly and completely, or urgently and completely. So I was reading this, I was thinking, what contributed to the ready response that these four guys gave? It would seem odd just to, if someone you didn't know would come up to you and say, "Follow me," and then you would follow them. So I was thinking that they probably had heard John preaching, John the Baptist preaching about the upcoming Messiah that was coming. They even might have been where Jesus was just maybe a few days before when he was baptized, or at least they probably had heard of it. If John was preaching about the coming Messiah, and then Jesus comes, and what happens when he was baptized? The dove came down and descended upon him, and God spoke from heaven. That probably wouldn't stay quiet. And as Jews, they were looking for something new. They were looking for the new kingdom of God to come and to deliver them. So they had heard this, and Jesus had did something beforehand to let them know that he was someone that they should have followed. They should follow. Granted, they didn't know exactly what that included yet, but they had heard and seen enough to know that they should follow him. I was thinking about us. What has Jesus done to show you and I that he is worthy to be followed? Well, we know a few things that these four disciples didn't know. And that is, what they didn't know then. That is, that's the cross and the resurrection. And on the cross, Jesus died for you and for me, for the world. He took our place of punishment, of sin, so that no one would ever have to die again for their sin if they accepted him. And in addition, in the grave, he was resurrected and he defeated death once and for all. Amen. And thus giving us the keys to eternity. Through his death and resurrection, we may also have the resurrection one day from these earthly bodies and go into heaven, live eternity with God the Father. So what has Jesus done? He's given us a way to the Father, way of salvation, making it possible that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, then you shall be saved. Romans 10:9. So the kingdom of God was at hand for these disciples, and is still available today. Now the question is, so have you decided to follow Jesus? Have you given your life to him? Next we go on to the next little word picture. One thing I like about Mark is his writing is very quick. He uses the word immediately, like 40 or 50 times in his Bible. In his gospel, and it jumps across, or it has many thoughts, and it's a very quick read. But here, going on, Jesus is described as someone with authority. Jesus begins his ministry by preaching with authority and proving that he has the authority by casting out a demon. Starting in verse 21, he says, "And they went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and was teaching. And they were astonished by his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority, and not as the scribes. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, 'What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God.' But Jesus rebuked him, saying, 'Be silent and come out of him.' And the unclean spirit convulsed him, and crying out with a loud voice came out of him. And they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, 'What is this?' a new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. And at once, his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee. Now, in our lives, we live with all kinds of authority, whether it's bosses at work or teachers at your school, parents or the police. And depending on how that authority is exercised, we feel either trapped or used, or we can feel secure and free and useful. That authority. In the beginning of the chapter, Mark described how Jesus was coming to fulfill the Old Testament longings of a ruler, of the Lord's ruler over all the earth. But what kind of king is Jesus? Well, Mark paints a picture of him as the king of authority. Now, the people were amazed, Mark said, at his teachings. His teachings were different because he taught as one with authority and not as the scribes or as the teachers of the law at that time. The differences between Jesus' teachings and the scribes was that the scribes never gave an independent opinion. They would always say, the scribes before us said this and this and this, or such and such. This rabbi said this about the scriptures. But here Jesus, he didn't quote anyone, but Jesus taught with authority because it came straight from God. He was witness even within himself. Then as Jesus was teaching, you can almost imagine the service was interrupted and a man cries out, was possessed by an evil spirit. It probably was startling. Maybe scared a few people. And when Jesus was teaching, this first time teaching in synagogues, in the book of Mark, we see he was immediately opposed by Satan. But you know that when you start doing God's work, this spiritual warfare, if you start to minister and just get things that wouldn't normally happen. The spiritual warfare, when you pray sometimes, you start thinking about the third grade teacher, and it's just, these thoughts you wouldn't normally ever think about. This spiritual warfare that comes in, trying to disturb you and hinder your ministry with God. And here, Satan comes in the form of this guy with an evil spirit. It was a key event because Jesus had the opportunity to show the authority he had over Satan. This guy, it's used as an evil spirit. Apparently his personality had been so severely damaged to the point that he was under complete control of a demon. Actually, it was more than one demon. Must have been several demons in this man. And these demons, they clearly recognized the authority that Jesus had. And they recognized the mission that Jesus had. And in verse 24, they acknowledged the true identity of Jesus. It's something that his disciples were slow to do. And as those who would cast out demons, usually at this time, according to some scholars, they would usually identify themselves by a name, by the name of some deity or power. Then they would say these words, or pronounce a phrase to cast down a demon. But Jesus here, he needed no incantation, no magical formula to exorcise this demon. He was the ultimate authority. He ordered the demon, he said, "Be quiet." And at this word of power and authority, the evil spirit convulsed the man, then he left him with a shriek. And it must have been both terrifying and amazing at the same time. Even Mark says, and the people were amazed again. In fact, they said, "What is this? A new teaching and with authority?" But they had never experienced such power and authority. And Jesus' teaching was backed up with his teaching with authority was backed up with an action of authority. So Jesus was both powerful in word and in deed. And Mark stressed the authority of Jesus when he shows, for the reason of to show how the kingdom of Satan was being broken down. He was establishing the reign of God. The question today for you and me, how do we respond to the authority of God? Do you see it like a boss who maybe traps you or hinders you? You feel bound up? Or do you see it as feeling secure and free? When Jesus came and he said that God sent him to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed. So he has the authority and the power to set you and I free. So many things in life can bind us up, right? It could be, as it was in these verses, Satan had bound up this man. But also, sometimes feelings can bind us up and hold us back. It could be feelings of doubt. Maybe you just aren't too sure if God is real, if Jesus is real, or if he's with you. It could be feelings of worry. Just consumed with worry or depression. Depression can come into someone's life and just suck out the joy, and it could be feelings of being condemned. Being condemned that, having a sense of unworthiness, not worthy of God's love, not worthy of another person's love. You have this spirit of unworthiness and even of hopelessness that nothing's going to turn out to be okay. All these feelings can bind us up. It can also make you feel bound up and trapped in sin. There could be a sin that you just can't seem to shake. You fail time and time again, and it seems to control your life. But here, there's good news. Jesus has the teaching and the authority to set you free. If the Son sets you free, then you will be free indeed. John 8:36. His words have power. God's words can break down these strongholds, these feelings in people's lives, and it can remove sin in people's lives, help you to overcome, be an overcomer. Now look at the scriptures. Find your strength in the scriptures. We say it here week after week. There's power, there's authority in Jesus through his words. There may be sometimes when you don't even know what to say. Maybe you can't find the right scriptures. You just don't know which scriptures to look for. Just can't find the right words. And Jesus says to call upon his name. It's Jesus. 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 There's power in the name of Jesus. I pray that today, maybe you would discover for the first time, or even once again, that Jesus is the ultimate authority in your life. He is Lord, and there's power in his teachings and in his words. Next, Mark continues the story of describing Jesus as a healer. Start verse 29. He says, "And immediately he left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. And now Simon's mother-in-law lay ill with a fever. And immediately they told him about her. And he came and he took her by the hands, and he lifted her up. And the fever left her, and she began to serve them." And 32, "So that evening at sundown they brought to him all who were sick and oppressed by demons. And the whole city was gathered together at the door. And he healed many who were sick with various diseases, and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him." And according to Jewish custom, the main Sabbath meal came immediately after worship service. I think that's just like here sometimes in many churches. After the worship service, you go and you eat together. I can just imagine after Jesus' teaching, after this happened, they go to Maybe they were invited to Peter's mother-in-law's house to go and eat. I don't know if you see this here. I thought it was kind of interesting. But talking about Peter must have had a wife. It's not mentioned much. It's one of the places in the New Testament. If Peter had his wife and goes to the mother-in-law's house to cook, you don't think much about the wives of the disciples, if they had some. I think in 1 Corinthians or one of the other books, they mention how, like in one sentence, how Peter's wife would travel with him to preach and to teach. And tradition even says, one of the extra biblical historians said that Peter's wife was martyred right before he was. Interesting to think about. But here they go to his mother-in-law's house. And this is the shortest miracle that's mentioned in the Gospels. It was private, it was not in public. And it was the recovery of Peter's mother-in-law. It was so quick and so complete that she immediately got up and began to serve them. And afterwards, the entire town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many people of their diseases, and he cast out many demons, Mark says, and everyone in Capernaum knew that Jesus was in town. The exorcism from verse 26 and the healings here in verse 21, they weren't isolated incidents. John even said in the last verse in his gospel, he says, there were many other things that Jesus did, and were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself cannot contain the books that will be written. So we see that Jesus was very active with the people, performing miracles and healing them and casting out demons. And as you read this about the mother-in-law, what kind of impression do you get about Jesus, this servant king? I think Jesus showed compassion to her. He showed compassion and love when he healed her. Notice he went to her, he took her hand, and he helped her up, and the fever left her. And Jesus could have just spoken the words like he did many other times. But instead, he reached down and he touched her. He seemed to be very compassionate and personal. But that's because he is compassionate and personal. He takes us by the hands spiritually and guides us. There's even those times when he heals us physically. I'm sure some of you can attest and be a witness to that. I know me too. But Jesus comes in to enter into our pain and to be with us, not just to observe it. It's great to know that you have a God who cares. And this whole town, Mark says, came to him, and he didn't turn them away. So this account again illustrates the power and the authority that Jesus had. Jesus continued to not let the demons speak because they know who he was. I just want to mention this because you see it sometimes in the Gospels how sometimes Jesus says, don't tell anyone. And you wonder, why is Jesus telling them not to go and tell what he did? But then other times, and you can see it later on in Mark how he healed someone, but then he does tell them to go and tell people. We don't know exactly, at least I don't know exactly why Jesus would do this, but I have a few thoughts. It's one thing that I've read, it could be that maybe because it was coming from the source of a satanic being, it could possibly discredit Jesus. Peter also experienced this in the book of Acts when someone followed him around for 2 or 3 days who was possessed by a demon, proclaiming that he was from God. Then finally, it says that Peter got tired of it and cast the demon out. Could be for that, or another explanation could be that Jesus did not want to be known primarily as a wonder worker or a political or military deliverer, because such a reputation would compromise his main mission of redemption. And one more, which I think maybe the most plausible, is that the Bible generally, and in Mark's gospel account of Jesus specifically, there could be tension between the known and unknown, between the revealed and the veiled. And until the cross and the resurrection and the true nature of Jesus could not be fully known. But Jesus wanted to show by word and deed what kind of Messiah he was before he declared himself openly as the Messiah. Now he would declare who he was, and not the demons in this case. It's something we can ask him when we get to heaven one day. Let's see. But and then one more. This fourth picture, word picture that Mark has, is Jesus as a preacher. In verse 35, Mark says that rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and they found him and said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." And he said to them, "Let's go on to the next town, that I may preach there also. For that is why I have come. That is why I came out." And he went throughout all of Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. So the events leading up to this have been pretty rapid, coming one after another. And I'm sure they all would have been emotionally and physically exhausting for Jesus. And how did Jesus renew himself at this I'm sure exhausting time? Well, he went and he spent time talking with the Father, with God the Father. The humanity of Jesus is evident in these words. How Jesus got up and he went off to a solitary place and he prayed. Even Jesus needed to recharge his batteries and to be withdrawn from the crowds, and he needed to talk with his Father. Just thinking, if Jesus needed it, and he was the Son of God, how much, maybe more, do we need it? And this wasn't the first time, or the only time that Mark mentioned Jesus praying. There's two other times he mentions it in Mark. It's a time after he walked on water, and a time on Gethsemane. And all three of these times were times when Jesus could have been tempted to take the easy way out. Here, the crowds were following him, they admired him, and they could have been easy for Jesus to set up his kingdom, his earthly kingdom that way. In the mountain of Gethsemane, it could have been easy for Jesus to take the easy way out and to not follow through by going to the cross. But here, Jesus goes and he prays for strength, prays for renewal. I'm just thinking about our lives. When's the best time for you to renew your strength? Do you have a time each day that you find you get alone and you are rejuvenated by the Word of God, rejuvenated by spending time with Him? I encourage you, if you don't have this time, to select a place to go daily and spend quality time with the Lord, just like Jesus did. In addition, when Jesus was concerned, or while Jesus was concerned about focusing on God's mission for him, the disciples seemed to be caught up in the increasing popularity of Jesus. Perhaps they felt that they should seize the day, and Simon comes up to him and says, "We were looking for you," and they exclaimed, "Everyone's looking for you." So he's kind of interrupted his being alone and being rejuvenated for people who wanted to be with him or who needed him. Have you ever been in that situation? Perhaps after a busy day, maybe busy yourself, but then people want to talk, or people need your ministry, need your time. This is something we can ask God for help. He has called us to edify the believers. He's called us to be a witness to those who don't know. And so ask God to help you keep a balance of when to meet with Him and when to meet with the needs of others. And I encourage you to not get so busy that you squeeze God out of your schedule. The saying, busyness can lead to barrenness. Psalms 127:1 says, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain, and unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stay awake in vain. Which means, unless you're spending time with God, what you're doing for God it's in vain. So spend time with the Lord. Be able to renew yourself in Him. So Jesus, see, he has, when the disciples come to Him, He has the desire to go to nearby villages. His desire is to not just be seen as a miracle worker, but has a purpose. It says, let's go somewhere else so I may preach there also. That is why I have come. So Jesus' primary mission was preaching the good news. It was not to be just a miracle worker, but He preached the good news, then He performed the miracles to kind of back up and show His authority. How if He can have the authority to perform the miracles, then of course you should listen to His words, because they have authority also. And so He says, He would go into the synagogues and preach. He would drive out the demons. The preaching of the word preceded the demonstration of the miracles, showing that the miracles backed up His authority. So questions for me and for you. First, are we preaching the good news? On your work, in your school, or wherever you are you being a witness, sharing with others what you know and what God has done for you? Then second, are you backing up your witness with your actions? Do my actions bring glory to God? Many years ago, the Prince of Wales visited India. And there was a barrier that was set up to keep back the masses of people who wanted to catch just a glimpse of the royalty. And when the prince arrived, he shook hands with some of the dignitaries and who presented to him. But then looking over the dignitaries' heads, he saw all the people. And regardless of their social rank, he asked for the barriers to be taken down. They were removed, and all the people had free access to the heir of the British throne. And sometime later, when the prince came to that district again, there were thousands and thousands of outcasts who waited under a banner that had inscribed on it, the Prince of the Outcast. And what the Prince of Wales did in that moment, it sounds very much like what Jesus might have done in the same situation. Well, he was a king for sure, but he was a king who demonstrated his power through his service to the people. Jesus' priorities are clear in this passage. We saw the care and the compassion that Christ had. We see His servant's attitude and how quickly He sought to bring help and healing to those in need. And we see Jesus as a man of authority, of action, and of passion to fulfill His mission of preaching the good news of salvation to the people. And today, as we're closing, if there's never been a time when you have accepted the love that Jesus offers here, I pray that today that you would not harden your heart, but you would, if you feel that feeling inside of you, like I ought to do that, I need to do that. That's the Holy Spirit drawing you, wooing you to Him, bringing you to Him. The Bible says that if you call upon the name of the Lord, you shall be saved. Believe in your heart that Christ was risen from the dead. You shall be saved. There's no magical words. There's no certain words you have to say It's the attitude of your heart. So as we pray, just in the attitude of your heart, you can invite Jesus into your life. Ask Him for the forgiveness of sins, to make you Lord, to make Him Lord of your life. And if you do that, I encourage you to find someone here today, me or someone else, and talk to them. If you have any questions, I encourage you to ask. I'll be standing up front during the music, and we can, if you need prayer, I can pray with you. Let's pray. Father, God, we thank you for sending your very best. God, we thank you for Jesus. God, help us to live and to love like Jesus.